Well, today is an exciting day. We're going to start cutting the pieces out for our quilt top. And before you start, if you're one of those persons now, some people wash their fabric first before they make their quilt, and some do not. I'm one of the ones that don't see the need to wash the fabric first. But if you want to wash your fabric, then you need to go ahead and wash it and dry it and press it. So what I'll do is just press my fabric before I start cutting to be sure it's a flat surface that I'm working on. Now I'm going to show you a couple different ways of cutting out the fabric. Now this is the way that I started. For many years I made my quilts by cutting them out with a pair of scissors. I've only had a rotary cutter for maybe 15 years, but before that I just used a pair of scissors, and I didn't have a bunch of fancy patterns or rulers. Now I have a set. I have this one is 12.5 inches, and I have, I think, a 6 inch and a 4 inch. And this one I believe is about 5 inches. But for years I cut out my own pattern on a little piece of cardboard. This is cardboard like on the back of a legal pad or something like that. Sometimes you get cardboard in packing when you order something, and they package it up. It has a piece of cardboard in it. So I use some of that. And this pattern that I've made is 4.5 inches square, which is the size squares that we need for this project. So let me show you how I do this. All right, so first I'm going to show you what I did when I didn't have a rotary cutter. So I would take my little pattern and I would adjust my fabrics, fold it so that I can get the most number, the largest number of squares that I can possibly get out of these pieces, these leftover pieces of fabric from another project, as I can get. Perfect. All right, so now I am going to take either a pencil or a piece of chalk. Let me see if I can see this blue chalk on blue fabric. And I mark it, and then I take my scissors and I'll be cutting 2 at the time, but I don't like to cut more than 2 pieces at the time. Sorry, that's my pair of scissors that I cut the cardboard with. Let me get my good fabric scissors. And I'm cutting out 2 squares. Now this method is not as exact as using the rotary cutter. And I'm going to trim just a little bit of this ragged edge off here. But I would sit and cut out my quilt squares and just thoroughly enjoy it. So I have my 2 squares, the first 2. Of course, we have quite a few to go, but I'm going to put this piece of fabric aside and show you how I cut the fabric with the rotary cutter. Alright, now this is my selvage. So I'm going to make sure my fabric is squared at one end. Now, it's very important to be as accurate with your cutting and with your sewing as possible, because otherwise things don't match up. So take your time and do the best job that you can. Now right now, I'm just squaring the end of this fabric because it has been used. Part of it's been used before. And I think my blade on that cutter is a little dull. Now I'm not as smooth. It's better to just make one clean cut, and I'm not the best at doing that. Okay, so the end is squared. And I am going to cut across from side to side. I'm going to cut a 4.5 inch strip. A 4.5 inch strip, and you can see the little marks on the ruler all the way down. You need to be sure that it's on the little 4.5 inch mark. Now hold it firmly down and cut your fabric strip. Okay, so now we have a 4.5 inch strip, and I'm going to cut the selvage off and square that end. Now I'm going to cut 4.5 inch squares out of my rectangle. So there's another 2 squares. Now, if you're using a color scheme of, 2 different colors for your 9 patches, you'll cut half of your squares out of one color and half. It won't be exactly half, but you'll need 5 of one color for each square, 12-inch square, and 4 of the other color. Now I'm using my stash, some of my leftover fabric. That's 2, 4, 6, 8 pieces, and this one I don't think is going to make, no, it's not going to make 2 more, but it will make 1 more piece. Okay, so I've got 9. Alright, and then I have one other piece that is gonna end up being a 3-inch square, but it'll go into another project. Alright, now I have some pink fabric that is gonna go with this fabric. And so again, I'm gonna put my 2 sides together. And make sure my end is even. Always start by squaring the end. Alright, now I'm going to cut my first 4.5 inch strip. Now keep in mind that most people are faster at this than I am. I'm very slow working with my hands, but I like to be accurate. And here I'm going to get rid of my selvage. Make sure everything's squared up. Now I noticed when I was pressing this fabric that this is not 45-inch fabric. It was 30 something inches. So I'm not going to get as many squares out of a strip as I did with the print. Let's see if I can get one more. Yes, yes. Alright. So I only got 7. I got 9 out of the print. And only 7 out of the solid. So we can lay out our first 9 patch and see how it's going to look. And remember that fabric, the top side is out, so that you'll know which is the top of the fabric. This is the top here, but then you have to turn the bottom one over. Alright, so that's how my first 9 patch is going to look. So things are looking up. Now your strips you'll cut in the same way. Okay, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to stack it up like this in the order that it should be sewn together. So that's the first 9 patch. And I don't have enough to make another 9 patch. I'll have to cut some more. But the strips, which I was going to do in white, the connecting strips, because I'm going to have quite a number of different colors in the quilt. Okay, I had to take time to press my white, which I'm going to use for the strips. Now, I want to make sure that y'all know that when you talk about the width of fabric, it's from side to side. Can you see the selvage? The selvage on the side, this finished area that is made so that it won't fray. The fabric won't fray or come unraveled. Okay, so that is from side to side. Your fabric from side to side is on average 45 inches. Some is wider, some is more narrow, but 45 inches is an average. And so the length of fabric then is the length from top to bottom, not from side to side. And that is going to be measured by the yard. So if you have a piece of 45-inch fabric that is a yard long, then it is not going to be a yard square. It's going to be 36 inches long by 45 inches wide. Okay, so I'm going to square this in. So all of our strips are going to be 4.5 inches wide. So I'm cutting this first strip. I'm cutting this first strip that's 4.5 inches wide, but I need I need 24 strips that are 9.5 inches long. So I'm going to start by getting rid of my selvage. And square this piece of fabric. Now I need 9.5 inch strips. So this gives me 2 of my 9.5 by 4.5 inch strips. So I've managed to get 4 of the 9.5 inch strips per strip. And I have a little bit left over. I can cut some 4.5 inch white squares. That I can use somewhere in my pattern. So now all we have to do is continue cutting out our pattern pieces, and next week we can start sewing them together. If you have questions, please leave me a message in the comments, and I'll answer right away. See you next week.